I'm from the UK. I'm a technical evangelist. My name's Martin Beebe. I'm on that Twitter there at the Beebs. If you're on Twitter, tweet me. We can talk about how much it sold for, which is ridiculous. Anyway, I'm going to be talking about Windows 8 applications and building them with HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Can I get the volume just a little bit lower because I'm getting some feedback? Look at the lights. They're lovely. It's like the stars. I digress. So I've been building Windows 8 applications now for about 3 years in the UK, and I work with large partners like the Financial Times, which is a big newspaper in the UK, and we kind of move them over to Windows 8 from their current platforms. I now go around the country in the UK talking about how we build Windows 8 applications using JavaScript and HTML. This is a kind of beginner, I would say, session in terms of, I'm going to cover a lot of ground about how to build a basic HTML and JavaScript application. And we're going to be talking roughly around some of the new features inside of 8.1 for JavaScript developers as well. How many people are JavaScript developers in the room? Like 3 people. What did someone say about JavaScript? How dare you! It's a beautiful language. Don't let anyone tell you any differently. It really is. All the readability of assembler, all the power and performance of the web. I kid, I digress. JavaScript actually is a really powerful platform. In terms of what you can do with it, the capabilities that you can do with it now, and just the layout capabilities of HTML and CSS, I think, and if you're a XAML person or an XML person which does layouts, you probably won't agree. But I think you can do much better things with layout with HTML and CSS than you can with any XML-based markup. In fact, any layout markup in the world. It's one of the most mature kind of layout systems that we have. And I think that building Windows 8 applications, or 8.1 applications, it's a beautiful little world to live in if you're just doing JavaScript and HTML. It's not as scary as maybe doing it for the web, where there are so many different browsers and so many different platforms and SDKs and different libraries. It's a far simpler proposition, in my opinion. So, I'm going to talk briefly, what is a HTML5 app in the context of Windows 8? And then for the next 50 minutes, we're going to be building an application. So, you would imagine a HTML and JavaScript application on Windows 8 is built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But it runs natively on our platform. And that's an important part, is that there's only about 3 other people in the world that build a platform in HTML and JavaScript which is native to the platform. So Firefox OS do it, we do it, and WebOS used to do it. And it's really important, that point, that we build the JavaScript framework. Because you're able to do anything in our platform with JavaScript that you're able to do with other technologies. It's a first-class citizen on our platform. It's just as valid of building an application as C# and XAML is. And all the animations and things, they work as expected, as we expected them, as we envisioned them to do when we were building Windows 8. You can use our frameworks and libraries, which are in the box inside of Visual Studio, or you can use any other way, any other library that you want to use. If you want to use AngularJS, if you want to use Knockout, if you want to use any of these JavaScript frameworks, you absolutely can do that. In fact, anything which works in IE 11 is going to work in Windows 8.1. It renders using the Trident layout engine. Now, unless you're a browser geek like me, you might not know what Trident is, but Trident is the thing that IE used to render HTML and CSS. So you're running IE 11 in 8.1. In 8, in 8.0, you're running IE 10. But fundamentally, it is just a browser that you're in. But we've added a few levels of security to it as well. So there are things that you cannot do with code that you just take from the web. So you can't just take some arbitrary JavaScript from the web and then exec it inside of the application, because it would be a huge, stupid thing to do. So there's levels of security that we add into it to protect our users so that they are safe and they're aware that they are using an application platform which is safe and considered. You have full access to the Windows runtime, and that's important as well, because most HTML and JavaScript devs don't get that opportunity. If you're building for the web, you either build for the web and you use the standardized communication methods to talk to the device, or you might build an application using something like PhoneGap or Apache Cordova or Trident or one of those platforms where you build with HTML and JavaScript and then you package it up and it actually runs as a separate application. Now, they're fine, but they only have about 80% coverage of the whole API on those platforms. With HTML and JavaScript, we implemented it so you have full coverage. Every API which is available to C# developers is available to you as a JavaScript developer. So you can do things which are weird, like you can do unzipping of files, for example, which you wouldn't necessarily be able to do on the web. You could do, things that you would expect to be able to do in applications, but wouldn't ordinarily be able to do on the internet, on the web, whatever you want to call it. The other thing, it's been designed specifically around touch. It has a first-class touch metaphor. So this whole platform is built around the concept of touch, which is not necessarily true of the web today. But also, of course, you'll be able to use it with mouse and keyboard as well. And the most important thing, because why would you build an application if you can't make money from it? We deploy it via a central Windows store, which means that you can package up your application, place it in the Windows store, and charge people for it. And we have lots of different ways that you can charge people for it. And we are probably the most accepting of all of the different platforms. We will allow you to sell it, just, I want to sell my application for $1. Or we might allow you to do freemium model. So, for example, if someone wants to buy an item or an upgrade for your application, they can do it from within in the application. And we manage all that stuff. We have an API for the store, so they can buy the application, and if they want to update or upgrade to little components, perhaps, you can sell them to them, all a sort of packaged in-app experience. And if you do that, there is a 70-30 split. So we get to keep 70%. No, we get to keep 30%, and you get to keep 70% of your hard-earned revenue. And if you make more than $25,000, then you owe me some money. No, if you make more than $25,000, then it turns into an 80-20 split, where Microsoft keep 20% and you keep 80%, which is really, really important. No other platform does that at that level. And then, if you don't want to use our platform for selling your application, as was the case with the Financial Times in the UK, you don't have to. You can put the application in there for free, and if you have an existing subscriber or an existing monetization platform, you can put that into your application and use it. Other platforms do not allow that. So we are unique in that capability. Likewise, you can use our ad SDK, so you can serve ads in your applications. And if you want to use ours, that's fine. There's that 70-30 split. Or if you want to serve ads using a completely different ad platform, and we make no money, that's fine by us as well. So whatever model or business model you have, you can bring it to Windows 8, and we don't have any exclusions in the same way as other platforms do, which is pretty cool. So one of the things when you're looking around Windows 8, how many people are Windows 8 users in the room? How many are XP users? One guy's terrified to put up his hand. Windows 7? Mac OS? Linux? Interesting. I don't know what the rest of you are using. I'm thinking, well, what other platform? Spectrums? Amiga 500 plus? Commodore 64? That guy. Yeah, very portable. I like strap it to my back. Anyway, when you're using Windows 8 applications, you shouldn't, as a developer, be able to distinguish between a JavaScript application and a C# application. I challenge you to distinguish between those without looking, or there is a way to find out, but without looking into the internals of the operating system, it's very hard to distinguish if it's HTML and JavaScript or C# and XAML. And that's not the case on most platforms for the HTML platform. So it's quite surprising when I show first-party applications we've built at Microsoft, and see if they're built in HTML5. So the first one, Xbox Video. Do you have this service in this country? No one knows. No one uses it, clearly. So Xbox Video is a kind of online streaming. You can download videos. It works across Xbox, of course, and Windows 8, so I can play various films and so forth. All this is built in HTML and JavaScript. Xbox Games, the actual Games Hub on the Windows 8 platform, again, is built in HTML and JavaScript. Now, you wouldn't know it looking at it. It looks just like a C# application as well. The animations are the same. The buttons, the controls are identical. And that's intentional. We wrote the controls and the animations so they would work on both platforms equally as well. The travel application, beautiful HTML application, using the power of HTML to let you travel the world without ever having to leave Basel. Is it Basel? Is that right, the pronunciation? Yeah. I called it Basel at the airport. I felt like an idiot. Basel. So the finance application, I'm never sure who uses a financial application on any platform, but they always have them. And it tells you stocks and shares that I don't care about. But on our platform, it's even better because it's built in HTML and JavaScript. Skype. A big surprise. People would never expect this one to be built in HTML and JavaScript, but it is. And that's my son. And he's very happy because I've just told him, that's built in JavaScript. And obviously then sport. The sport app covers all sports from, proper football and to American football. It's a highly complex app. There's lots of different data feeds going into that application. It's very, very complex. And they built that using HTML and JavaScript. The news app on Windows 8 brings us news such as, iPad burst into flames. And perhaps the iPad burst into flames because it realized the HTML platform on my device is not as good as the one in Windows 8. Maybe, just maybe. Unlikely. And this is the weather application. Again, another beautiful, fluid application. If you scroll around this application, the animations are wonderful. It's a fantastic application to use. We have a very different, actually, I've discovered this application in Switzerland. It's very different in the UK. When you load the weather application in the UK, it just says, it's raining, get over it. No, but it's beautiful, and I love this application, the way it's designed, and as the weather changes, the backgrounds change, and so forth. But again, if you use these applications, and try Windows 8 devices today if you're not a Windows 8 user, and try and determine if you can figure out the difference between HTML and JavaScript applications and C# applications. You can't. Developers can't, I can't. The only way I ever know is if I actually look in the internals and figure out, is it running a browser shell or not? And you can get that from the Process Explorer. Anyway, so a Windows Store application, it's built using HTML, and on the top you have your application. And then we have Win.js, which is this Windows JavaScript library. We have a HTML and CS, how do I use this thing maybe? HTML and CSS platform. That's the Trident layer. Along this, we've got this WinRT, which is the shared API across all of our platforms. So everything which is available to WinRT for C# is available for WinRT in JavaScript. We use language projection to be able to use all of those APIs. So you can use any Windows API. The HTML and CSS sits on top of the IE rendering engine, the Trident engine. And then that, along with WinRT, sits on top of Windows. And so your application has these layers in between Windows. You'll notice there's no abstraction or third-party library like PhoneGap. If you wanted to use PhoneGap, you absolutely could. There's nothing stopping you. But out of the box, this is the architecture that we use. Anything which is possible on other platforms. If you don't like this model for developing HTML and JavaScript applications, you want to use another one, that's completely fine. You're completely free to use those. And if it works in a browser, it will work in our store as well. But it's just, this is the default kind of way it works. So I mentioned Win.js there. So what Win.js is? Well, it's a collection of, firstly, style sheets, which style the application. There are two, light and dark, good and evil. I'm not telling you which one. There is a core, which has some really useful helper classes. There's a concept called promises in Windows 8 JavaScript applications. Now, promises are never kept. No, promises are in lots of JavaScript applications. Has anyone ever used JavaScript promises in libraries before? Has anyone ever used jQuery? Then you're lying, because that's got promises built all the way through it. When you're using that Fluent API, when it's like CSS, kind of dot, and then it does something else, that's fundamentally a promise. And that Fluent API and the way that works is something which we've developed further, and also there are other platforms, and I know Yahoo have a promises library as well, which is almost identical. But it's doing things in a kind of asynchronous way, using JavaScript in an asynchronous way, and keeping your code really, really nice. We have the app model, which I described. Basically, there's that kind of architecture, which is in Win.js, and there are some helper functions and structuring and scaffolding to help you build those kinds of applications. We've got data binding, so you can bind your data, your JavaScript objects, to HTML in the same way that you would use it with Knockout.js or potentially AngularJS or any of these other libraries. But we built our own as well. Excuse me. There are controls. All of the Windows controls, time pickers, date pickers, all of these things are in that library. Animations, which are crucial, because most JavaScript application platforms, or which go cross-platform, they never care about the animation. It's always a thing which is forgotten. Between designers and developers, animations are always the things which get lost, because the designer comes out with a PSD, which is flat, and the developer scratches his head and tries to put it and make it working somehow. And there's never that, very rarely, unless you're working with a very good company, do they consider the animations and transitions of content and data as it flows on a form. Well, Win.js makes this very simple to do, some of these animations. And then there's a collection of utilities as well. But it's a collection of toolkits to make building Windows Store apps fast and easy. That's my marketing voice. Everything in that little side panel is generally marketing. Win.js basics. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a file new project. Look at this, coding no hands. Amazing, isn't it? I'm going to do it in Visual Studio. So we go take a Win.js sample application, use the basic application template, and it will generate us inside the Solution Explorer an application, and it's just a plain HTML document it creates called default. If I change that to a H1 and replace it with hello, Basel, and then run that. Oh my God, we've got an app. It's not very good, but it's an app nonetheless. Now, if I change this to a div and give it an ID of, say, my div, so I'm that imaginative, and then we go into the default.js, which is the JavaScript file which sits behind that default HTML page. And in the app.onActivated, we're going to just add some code to create a control. And we're going to create a control in that div. So my element equals document.getElementID by ID. There are easier ways to get elements, but I like this because it shows it's just the web. And then we put in the name of the element, which is my div. And then we new up a control. So we go into the Windows.js library.ui. Date picker. And then we just pass in as the constructor the HTML element where we want to construct our date picker. So now if I load this, my version 2 of my minimal viable product now has a date picker control. It's the Windows date picker control. So you can create them in code behind, effectively, in JavaScript, or you can be declaratively creating these controls. So if I go back to this div, and rather than use, I don't need an ID anymore, I use -data, that should say -data, but don't worry, it still compiles, but it should say -data. -data win control. And then I choose the Win.js UI time picker. I declaratively declare that control. And now when I start up, the time picker is now in place where that div was. It's black magic. How does this work? How does it create those things? Well, it creates them rather simply. In the app on activated routine, there's this line here called args.setPromise. That's not important. what is important is winjs.ui.processAll. And that crawls through all of the HTML in your application, and it finds all of those data attributes on those divs, and it creates the control. You know, it injects JavaScript, it injects all the clever things, adds all the handlers, it's just CSS, JavaScript, those controls. They're nothing special, they're not system-level controls, they are just HTML and JavaScript. The beauty of it is they look like they're system-level controls because we made them, and the animations and the movements and everything which works, it works exactly the same as C++ controls in XAML look like as well. So that's where that magic happens, which creates the HTML markup into real controls. So there is a few differences between the web environment. See that marketing?